Folks, in the previous segments, we've been talking about South African problems, and it's going to be a long year because we do have a number of problems that as a country we must resolve. But I think whenever there is an important positive story that is emerging, it's important that we highlight it, especially this time around, because anyone who's been reading the news in the last week of July in South Africa, you may have noticed that Transnet has said, look, the activity at the ports is going fairly well, especially for the agricultural sector. They came out citing the volumes of citrus and the others that they've been assisting with pushing to the export markets. And I think that's an important thing, because if you look back about 2 or 3 years, one of the biggest talking points in South African agriculture was around the logistics, the inefficiencies at the ports. And at the time, the key conversation was about how can the private sector, working with Transnet, government, and many others in the logistics value chain, assist in ensuring that we see some progress. And I think what Transnet was talking about and signaling some positive as well as progress news in their chain speaks exactly to the outcome of all of these interventions that have been made by many stakeholders. So it's kudos to everyone that has been involved, not just on a Transnet side. But I think this is still the start, because it doesn't mean that all things are being resolved, because certainly if you speak to other commodities, you may experience that they have challenges here and there. But I think this is a good and an important launching pad that we are now seeing some improvements in the logistics in South Africa. Then we must build on this momentum. And I think it's important that we highlight those news. Because think about it, in South African agriculture, the point that we have made consistently is that we are a sector that is export-oriented. You're exporting about half of what we produce. And yes, we've talked about what markets you must be looking into, and that is an important discussion, because at the start of it, there has to be someone who's willing to buy your products and they have the money to actually purchase those products. But I think the other important part is the efficient logistics that can get the product there efficiently, timely, in a much more affordable way as possible. And this is why I think many industries in South Africa, when Transnet faced difficult issues, they were saying, look, you've got to resolve this problem. And I think we are now nearing, to a certain extent in some value chain, in that point. So the Transnet team and the others, they really need to ramp up whatever they've been doing to get us to this position where the volumes are looking reasonably well. And I think the issue of logistics, again, a point we have discussed, it needs not to be left only to Transnet. I mean, all of those that are running the small towns, if you are watching us from any other rural town or small town in South Africa, especially if you are in the Free State or the Eastern Cape or Northern Cape, you're probably struggling with the roads issues. And you hear me and the others talking about the need to support agriculture, not only through farming and all of the activities that we do, trading the products domestically as well as international, but also by bringing tourism into the sector, this whole concept of agritourism. Because what agritourism means is really people visiting the farms and the communities, experiencing what it's like in these farming communities, but also then getting an opportunity to procure, buy a couple of things that are being sold, so that these places are as vibrant. And these can also be beneficial for the hospitality industry, accommodation, and all of these things. And they make those towns to be as solid. And I'm sure any South African or anyone who has visited our country, you know what has happened in the garden route, in the wine routes of South Africa. A number of businesses have come out of that, and they are supporting all of the activities that are there. The key thing then is about how do we have that vibrancy in other parts of our towns, in the provinces. And that involves not only us thinking about the commodities and innovative ways of how we handle our commodities and what the farmers can do and creating small businesses around, but the logistics and security of the rural towns are at the top of that. So while we celebrate the improvement at the ports, I do think that we should be talking also about the improvements that are being made in the local municipalities. And the municipalities, again and again, I will repeat the point, they need to ramp up their game onto that and ensuring that the roads are in a fair condition. And it is also the issue of security in the small towns that also needs to be ramped up. Because if we talk about agritourism, we are talking about fixing the roads. That means then automatically the issue of security will also need to be ramped up. And I think those are important aspects of supporting the agricultural sector in South Africa. Because we are sitting now in an environment where there are challenges in terms of trade. We will continue to trade. Half of our products go to export markets. But there's also a need to say domestically, what can we do to ramp up the use of some of our products so that we continue to have a robust demand of some of these products here, while at the same time, of course, we continue to participate internationally. And I think these are conversations we will have to be having. But their responsibility needs not to be only given to the Department of Agriculture. When it's agriculture, everyone is thinking, what is the department doing? No. What are you at the municipality doing about this? Because ultimately, a robust agricultural sector, better incomes by agribusinesses, many people working in your town, it gets spent into your town and it improves the vibrancy of that particular town. And I think this is one of the ways at which we can support the rural towns. And I mean, I speak as someone from the Eastern Cape. And certainly in our province, we have a number of excellent places where I think tourism can actually be lifted in the Eastern Cape. We have the great coastline, but the key thing is, again, is these roads and the security that needs to be improved. And I think that should be the priority amongst other things when we are thinking about how do we take South Africa forward and thinking about the agricultural sector. But more good news in this environment where people are talking about closing their borders. I think South Africa, we can do something to actually open up our borders a little bit more and buy a couple of stuff. Many of you may have heard that Brazil is facing about 50% or so tariff from the US. So we will see how that pans out. But regardless of what it does, Brazil is one of the biggest players in global agriculture. But one of the products that they export, which as South Africa we buy quite a bit, is coffee. As this country, we import just under 25,000 tons of coffee. And I think that if Brazil is facing all of these difficulties that we see in the US, they will have their headaches with coffee. But I think us here in South Africa, we can buy a little bit more of that Brazilian coffee. And in fact, I do think that a few more tons can come out of that. But there will be two things that we'll be requesting from the Brazilians. It's a better quality, and it's a better pricing of that. And I think if we can get that, then South Africa can increase to a certain extent its coffee imports. And yes, we do have our own domestic coffee production. Yes, that's an important aspect that we need to continue to procure from. But I do think that diversifying and adding to what we are buying from Vietnam, increase a little bit more of the Brazilian, it will be an important aspect on this journey. Because as South Africa, while we talk about how much we export, we also import quite a lot. I mean, we spend $7 billion or so importing products, and coffee is part and parcel of that, amongst other things. The other important news that I think are worthwhile highlighting, and I know that if you are a farmer in the Western Cape, you're probably thinking, what is this guy talking about? This is not all news, there's a profitability issues, but it's around the winter crops. The winter crops in South Africa are in good condition. We've received excellent rainfall in a number of regions of the Western Cape. And outside the Western Cape, we had good rainfall over the past couple of months. This is this long summer rainfall that we have experienced. And that has enabled us to have a better soil moisture, which is supporting the winter crop. I'm highlighting the Western Cape because about 2/3 of our wheat crop is planted in the Western Cape. By winter crop, if you're watching this, we're talking about wheat, barley, canola, and oats. Those are the major winter crops. If you look at the area that South Africa planted, it is up by roughly 1%. It's not that big, but it's still something compared to what they had planted last year. The overall area is around 824,000 hectares. That's the area that we have planted. But the most important thing is that we've received good rains, we've planted a decent area, and in our view, we think that there will be better wheat yields, better barley yields, better canola yields and oats, and that puts us in a fairly better position on this. But The Western Cape farmers will not be getting rich. You won't see them going on and buying new bakkies because of all of this. The challenge is that the input costs when they planted were fairly high. If you think about the fertilizer prices when the season started, agrochemical prices, those were quite high. And I think that added a little bit of a pressure on the guys. The other challenges that folks struggle with in certain regions of the Western Cape were the snails. We had one of the wet summers, for some reason, a lot of snail, especially in the canola planting, and that meant that folks have to replant and replant a couple of times in some of the regions, and that increases their production costs. But overall, the season is looking well, and I thought that in this week's segment, it's important that we highlight some of the positive news that are coming out in the sector, which is one, the ports that are now seeing a little bit more improvement and efficiency compared to where we were. Two, that we can buy some of the other stuff. Brazil, bring in that coffee, but make sure it's a good price and good quality. And three, the fact that our winter crops are looking quite good, but the input costs remain the pressure. And I think the story of the input costs is something that we will need to explore even further, because in about a month or two time now, we are starting the summer crop season. That's the 2025-26 production season. And as it starts, if anyone is monitoring the fertilizer, the agrochemical prices, they continue to increase, largely driven by international factors. And we are seeing that it may present some challenges even for the domestic summer grain farmers in South Africa when the season starts. But that's something that we have explored in a previous segment, and we will go deeper in it in some of the upcoming segments. That's it for the week, folks. And thank you so very much for watching this. And always subscribe and spread the word.